China issued $1 billion worth of sovereign bonds in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. This move has left the United States completely dumbfounded. Many people don't understand it, but I do. It aims to fleece the United States thoroughly. So what exactly has happened? As is well known, when a country usually issues sovereign bonds denominated in its own currency, it must use its own national currency because a country's sovereign credit is reflected in its own currency. For example, the U.S. sovereign bonds are denominated in U.S. dollars, and China's sovereign bonds are denominated in RMB. However, this time China has done the opposite and issued sovereign bonds denominated in U.S. dollars. This is sure to infuriate the United States to death. China and Saudi Arabia are the two countries with the largest dollar reserves and the largest dollar surpluses. Saudi Arabia holds a large amount of U.S. dollars. It can't be spent at all. Currently, it is said that the Saudi central bank has $445 billion in foreign exchange reserves. The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund also holds assets worth at least $1 trillion. What Saudi Arabia needs now is infrastructure, technology, and advanced weapons. But the United States can't provide these. The dollars in Saudi Arabia's hands can only keep depreciating. The trap the United States has set for Saudi Arabia or other countries in the world, the dollar trap, is that you earn dollars and then buy U.S. Treasury bonds. Eventually, the dollars flow back to the United States, forming a harvest. All the benefits go to the United States. Saudi Arabia has dollars in one hand and U.S. Treasury bonds in the other, and both are just worthless pieces of paper. From a national perspective, although Saudi Arabia exports a large amount of oil every year, it only gets a piece of paper from the United States in return. So for resource exporting countries like Saudi Arabia and industrial exporting countries like China, it seems like a trade surplus. But as long as you exchange goods for dollars, and finally, since there is nowhere to use them, they have to flow back into the hands of the United States. Right. Except for a so-called U.S. sovereign commitment, nothing is gained. And those countries with a trade deficit with the United States will be even worse. If you want to buy things and conduct international trade, you have to use dollars. Without dollars, you can only borrow. The external debt is getting higher and higher. Eventually, the whole country will be drained. What's more terrifying is that the United States will also use interest rate hikes and cuts to harvest other countries. So the largest export commodity of the United States is that green piece of paper. Then, let's go back to the issue of China issuing U.S. dollar-denominated treasury bonds. This is equivalent to that China, without the consent of the United States, directly opened a branch of the Federal Reserve. I'm determined to take advantage of the U.S. dollar hegemony. In previous U.S. interest rate hike cycles, there would always be countries experiencing economic crises. But this time, since China is the country with the largest trade surplus in the world, and China has been constantly taking out the dollars in its hands and lending them to countries with trade deficits, which is equivalent to privately distributing the liquidity of the U.S. dollar and cutting in on the deal. For example, when Argentina defaulted on its debts and the whole country owed a huge amount of external debts in U.S. dollars, what the United States wanted was all of Argentina's core assets. The dollars lent by China to Argentina were actually equivalent to a debt swap. China became a middleman. Originally, Argentina could only use its core assets to pay off the debts. Now, Argentina borrows dollars from China to repay the debts and then repays China with beef, grain and minerals. Naturally, Argentina is willing to do so, and China has effectively spent the dollars and got resources in return. The countries that defaulted on their debts are happy because they have repaid their debts. China is also happy, as it has bought a lot of raw materials and food at a low price. And the one that is the least happy here is the United States. Now, there's a middleman in the dollar hegemony. More and more countries, especially those in the third world, no longer turn to the United States when borrowing dollar-denominated debts, but come directly to China instead. The United States must be furious about this, and among all the countries in the world, only China can do this. Because China is currently the largest trade surplus country in the world and has the strength to use its own dollar reserves to fill the liquidity gap of the U.S. dollar. China's targeted issuance of $2 billion worth of sovereign bonds to Saudi Arabia this time is clearly a form of financial innovation. After its successful operation, the flow of dollars from Saudi Arabia's side will be connected to China. It's equivalent to that Saudi Arabia's dollars can be directly lent to China for use. This is just like the China branch of the Federal Reserve, with Saudi Arabia as the major shareholder. In the future, if any country defaults on its dollar-denominated debts, or those countries with trade deficits can directly borrow dollars from China as the world's only largest industrial country. China's demand for raw materials is endless. The biggest demand in China's foreign trade is for raw materials. Previously, the United States took advantage of interest rate hikes and cuts to harvest low-priced assets around the world. Now, why can't the United States harvest other countries through interest rate hikes and cuts anymore? It's because China, the middleman, has emerged now. What if a country can't repay its external debts denominated in U.S. dollars? It can just call China. The process is short and the loan can be granted quickly, which makes you feel at ease. This is equivalent to that China has replaced the United States to harvest the low-priced resources and assets around the world. And at this time, the United States will find that all those worthless pieces of dollar paper have come back to it, and it hasn't harvested anything else. Then, the United States is suffering from serious inflation at home. How brilliant China's wisdom is! The dollar has been turned into an object for trading and a unit of account, so to undermine the dollar hegemony doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of the dollar. This set of operations is really smooth. It's equivalent to that all countries have been connected with China, and China is, in a way, the biggest agent of the dollar. Then China, which is very creditworthy, returns those green pieces of paper to the United States. All the benefits go to China, while the inflation stays with the United States. In the future, when countries conduct trade with each other, they can just keep accounts and directly use the multilateral currency settlement terms provided by China as the middleman. The United States will definitely not be happy about it. But it can't do anything to China, because it has to get past the Chinese People's Liberation Army. You now understand what is meant by peaceful rise. You'll understand it when you see what China is doing. What China is doing is equivalent to taking over the financial system established by the United States. The United States will find that the dollars in its hands are becoming more and more of a hot potato. Remember that old saying of the United States before, "Our dollars, your problem." It's really funny when you think about it.